The purpose of this video is to explain how to add a score to an Alice project, something that you might use for a game where you need to keep track of whether a hero has gotten some enemies or any number of things. So in Alice, let's go ahead and create a new project. If you'd like to follow along, I'm going to use the room scene. Click OK. And I'm going to set up the scene and I'm going to search for a bunny. And I'm going to bring the bunny forward a little bit. And I didn't mean to do it on the y-axis. Moving it up, moving it forward. Okay, so -2, there we go. I've moved it forward. Let's go -3, just bring it a little bit closer to the camera. I'm going to turn the bunny around, so it's facing the back of the room. Perfect. And now I'm going to go ahead and add those ogres. There's one ogre. I'm going to move the camera up just a bit. And I'm going to add another ogre. And this ogre I'm going to move to the left a little bit. And I'm going to add one more ogre. And this ogre, ogre 3, I'm going to move to the right a little bit. Okay, so we've got one bunny facing 3 ogres. Now let's say the object of this game is to hug the ogres because, the ogres, they seem a little grumpy and maybe the bunny just thinks they need a hug. And every time you hug an ogre, it disappears and your score goes up by 1. So that's the purpose of this game. And in order to do this, we're going to need to track the score. So how do we add a score label to the world where we're going to actually display the score to the user? Well, that's pretty easy to do. We're going to go ahead and click on the Shapes and Text tab here. We're going to add a text model to the scene. So click this, but we're going to name this the score. We're going to name this the score. Okay, now we're going to change the text to be 0 to start. And we're going to move it to the right a little bit. That's -3 on the X that I've just done. And I'm going to move it up a little bit so that it's just off the floor. 2.0 for the Y value. And that's a little bit too high, so let's go with 1.5. Good, so now we can see the score sort of up in the top right-hand corner of the screen, kind of like a heads-up display in a game. When you add a score to a game, if you think about the bunny moving around this world, you're going to want the score to move with your hero. So that means that the score should be made a vehicle to the hero, in this case, the bunny. So I'm going to grab the score as an object, and I'm going to set its vehicle to the bunny. And again, the purpose of that, dragging a comment out, is to make sure the heads-up display follows the hero. Okay, great. So right now, we've got the scene set up. We've got our 3 ogres, we've got our hero, and we've got our score. So that is the basic scene setup. And now we're going to start look at how we make this work in code. Okay, so first let me illustrate how we can make the score itself change. We're going to need to use some event listeners. We need to respond to some events. And just to show you how to change the score and track the score in as simple an example as possible, first we're just going to make the score increase whenever we press the up arrow. So let's make an event listener that listens for an up arrow key press. And this is our generic key press listener. So we need to check to see what kind of key was pressed. So if we go down to the bottom of the screen, you can see there we've got various tiles. We want an if tile. So we're going to drag that out. Just choose if true for the start. And then if we drop this down, if we drag out the event is key, just drag that and replace the true in the if statement, we can choose what we want it to respond to. An up arrow key press. So if event, the key is up, what are we going to do? Well, we want to change that score, increasing it by 1. The thing is that is a text model in the scene. That 0 is text like a word, so you can't add 1 to a word. So we need to track the score internally inside the program as a number, and then change that number into a string so we can display it up here in the text model. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the scene. We're going to add something called a scene property. And this is just a variable. It's a place where we can store a value that can change while we are running our program. So we're going to add a scene property, call it the score, make the type a whole number because we don't want the score to change by part of a number. We want it to be 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And the initializer, let's set the score to 0 just to start. And we can't call it the score because that is the name of our text model. So sorry, let's call it the score value. There we go. So that's a little thing to realize, is that you can't name an object in your scene the same as a variable in your code. So we already made the text model called the score. That's why the score is not available. So we're going to call this the score value. All right, so you can see here that the score value is set to 0 to begin. So back to our event listener. When the key up arrow is pressed, what do we want to do? Well, what we want to do is we go to the scene. We want to change the score value to be equal to the score value. Well, that doesn't make sense. We want to change the score value to be equal to the score value plus 1. So we're going to use math tile and add 1 to it. So this, when the key up arrow is pressed, it's going to increase that variable by 1 every time. If we press the run button right now, it's not quite yet what we need. If I press that up arrow on the keyboard, you can see the score is not changing. And that's because we're changing the internal variable that tracks the score, but we're not updating that text model that we added to the scene. What we have to do to get it to show on screen is to go to that text model, which is here, and we have to set the text that's supposed to show in that model. So we're going to drag this tile out and set the text to custom text string, and we just want it to be equal to an empty string to start, which seems kind of strange. But then we're going to say set it equal to an empty string plus something. Plus what? So we want to make it an empty string and append to that a whole number. And what whole number do we want to append to it? We want to append the score value, the contents of that variable that we just increased. So now when the key up arrow is pressed, we're increasing that internal variable, the score value, by 1, and then we're changing the text model to display the current value of that variable. Now if we run the program, press the up arrow on the keyboard, you'll see that the score increases. And you'll notice that even though I press the key once, the score increases multiple times because the computer tracks that event happening really quickly, and it fires multiple times before I can release my finger from the key on the keyboard. So how might you make it only fire once? Well, there is a detail option on the key press listener where if you say held key policy, you can just say, do you want it to happen multiple times, which is the default? Do you want to make it happen once when it's pressed or once when the key is released? And we want it to happen once when it's pressed. So now if I run the program, by changing that key policy, you can see the score is just increasing by 1 every time. So that is very helpful. And that's a basic example of how to display a numeric value on screen in a text model. Of course, this is not quite what we want in our game. We want to track the score when the bunny goes and hugs the ogres. So we're going to make that happen in the next part of this video. Okay, so how do we make the bunny change the score when it goes to hug one of the ogres? Well, first of all, we have to add some more key press listeners. In fact, we need to add an up, left, right, and back. We got to make that bunny move when we press the arrow keys. So we did this earlier this year in the course, but we're going to recap it now. First of all, these two tiles that change the score, those are useful. We might as well make that into a method because increasing the score is something that we might want to use in multiple places in the code for our game. So I'm going to click on the scene tab and add a scene procedure. I'm going to say that this procedure is called increase score. And then what am I going to copy in there? I'm going to copy these two tiles. I'm just going to put them inside of a do in order so I can drag them to the clipboard a little more easily. So now they're inside that method called increase score. And then if I wanted to actually increase the score, I could just call that method anytime I want to, and the score will change. Just to demonstrate that now, it's inside of the procedure or a method, but if I press the up arrow, the score still increases like it did before. So let's make this bunny actually move around in response to key press events. We don't actually want to increase the score when the up arrow is pressed, so I'm going to trash that. We're going to make this bunny move when I press the up arrow key. So we got to switch to the bunny. And make it move forward by 1 meter. Add some detail, make this happen quickly, 0.5 of a second, and make the animation style begin and end abruptly, which tends to work better when you're moving something around. Now, I basically want to use this same tile again, but make the bunny move backward when the down arrow is pressed. So I'm going to copy this to the clipboard, drag this out of the clipboard, and when the down arrow is pressed, changing it to the down arrow, we're going to make the bunny move backward. And now when I run my program, you'll see that the bunny can move forward and backward. And you can see that the heads-up display follows the bunny. Now that doesn't actually look great right now. It looks kind of weird because the score moves, but the camera doesn't move. So one other thing that we forgot to do to make this be a true sort of first-person style game is make the camera be vehicle to the hero as well. So we should go back to our my first method and take the camera and set the camera vehicle to the bunny. And now you can see that we get that sense of the heads-up display really is attached to the bunny moves, and the camera moves with the bunny. So don't forget to make the camera be set vehicle to the bunny as well. Okay, what's next? Well, we need to make that bunny move left and right, or turn left and right. So we're going to duplicate this tile again, copy it to the clipboard, drag it down, and when the key becomes, let's say, a right key, we don't want to move the bunny anymore. We want to turn the bunny. So when the right key is pressed, we're going to turn the bunny to the right by 0.125 turn, and the animation style will be abrupt, and the duration will be quick. Let's see if that looks okay. Pressing the right arrow, and that's a bit too much of a turn. We also made the camera turn, not the bunny, so gotta make that be the bunny. And I think that was the problem. Let's try that again. Okay, so now things look correct, but it's turning way too much. So let's just fix that a little bit more. Maybe make that be 0.05 of a turn. Let's try this now. Okay, probably a bit too much. That's better. 0.01 of a turn seems to be about the right feel for that. All right, and then we need to duplicate this, copy to the clipboard, and modify it so that the bunny turns to the left. Okay, we've got basic movement down, so that's great. Next thing we need to do in our scene is Next thing we need to do in our scene is to actually make the bunny cause the score to go up when it gets close to one of the ogres and make the ogres disappear. So that's the last part of this tutorial. And then we'll be finished our simple game called Hug an Ogre. Okay, before I go too much further, I should probably save my work. Good idea to save, so I'm going to do that now. And I'll just call this Bunny and Ogre Score Increase Example. Okay, so now we need to actually make those ogres disappear when we get close to them. So how do we do that? Well, there's a concept in Alice of a list. We used lists briefly earlier this year, but we're going to recap what lists are. Another name for a list in a computer program is something called an array, but I prefer to think of it as a list because that's something that everybody understands. Now I'm going to add a scene property, just like we did earlier for the score. When we add this property, we're going to make the value type be gallery class biped. So what we're saying here is that inside this array or list, the only things that can be in that list are values of type biped or something that's descended from the biped class. And we're going to call this, in this case, the enemies. So, or the targets, maybe a better name. So the targets are the things that we're going to try and find in our game. And in the initializer, what we're going to do is choose custom array or custom list. We're going to add the ogres to this list. So it's basically a list of all of the opponents or targets in our game. So all 3 ogres are in the list. Now we're going to click OK. And so as soon as our program begins, we're going to have a list or an array called the targets containing all 3 ogres. We also need to make another list of the hero or heroes. You could have multiple players in a game. We're going to make another scene property, also a value type of gallery class, meaning biped in this case. And we're going to make this be called the heroes. So again, we only have one hero in this game, but we could have multiple heroes. You could make a 2-player game. One player moves with arrow keys and another player moves with AWSD, for example. But we're going to just have one hero. So we're going to make a list still. We're going to make this be an array. It must be an array. But the initializer, in this case, we're just going to add the bunny. Okay, so we've got the bunny inside that list. And so our heroes is just one hero, the bunny, and our targets are the 3 ogres. And so here's the key part of making, getting close to a character and making the character disappear happen. What you need is an event listener, and it's going to be based on position and orientation. And when we get close to one of the targets, so basically it's a collision start listener. It compares 2 lists of objects in an Alice game. In this case, we're going to compare the heroes, that's set A, to the targets, that's set B. And the way this works is anytime one thing from set A, any of the items in set A, gets close to any of the items in set B, then this procedure, collision started, will fire. Thing is, it's hard to know exactly what item it was that got close to the other. So what we need inside of this, event is a way to check all of the targets and to see which of those targets it is that actually was gotten close to by the bunny. Which one did the bunny actually get close to? So we're going to use a new type of control structure here. And the control structure that we're looking for is the for each in. And what this does is it basically lets you loop through all the items in set B and check each of them one by one. And we're going to check to see each, as we go through them one by one, which one is the one that's close to the bunny. Since there is only one thing in the list of heroes, we know that the bunny is the item from set A, but we don't know which ogre it is from the list of targets that the bunny has gotten close to. So we use this for each in. We're going to drag that there. Let's try that again. Right, there's the window. So I've zoomed out. I'm going to cancel that so you can see this. I'm going to drag the for each in there. And we have to make some selections here. So for each in, for each, go to gallery class, for each biped, in the array, the targets, what do we want to name within the context of this loop? What do we want to name the biped that we're checking right now? Well, we're going to say target. So once you type all this in, it makes sense when you read it. For each target of type biped in the list of the targets, and within this loop, you can do something with it. You can check against the current target. So this loop will go through, it'll loop 3 times. It'll check all 3 targets. And for each target that it's inspecting, one at a time, it's inspecting each target in that list. The target that it's currently inspecting is the target that will be here, represented by that tile. So if we click OK, we've now got that loop in there. And within that loop, what we need to do is add an if statement. This is a little bit clunky, but we're going to drag this if statement in. Just choose true for right now. And we need to make a comparison. So remember, this is the list of targets. This loop is letting us loop over all the targets in the list of targets. And this tile represents the target that the collision has happened to. So that's what we're going to check in this if statement. So it's a little bit odd, but I'll sort of make the if statement and then we'll talk about what it means. So we're going to compare 2 things to each other. So it's an if statement where we're checking to see if one thing equals another. So we're looking here, we're going to say, does the current target in the list of targets that we're looking at match? For now, we'll just choose target. Now that doesn't make any sense. If target equals target, we're going to replace the second target with get thing from set B. So in other words, again, one more time, this loop goes through all the targets in the list of targets. As it inspects each target in the list, it's going to see if it's the target that this event was triggered by. So if it's the third ogre, that's this tile will tell us it's the third ogre. And as we loop through all the targets, this if statement will fire when we get to that third ogre. Again, like I said, a little clunky the way this works, but now within this if statement, we can do things to the ogre that the bunny has gotten close to. So let's think about what we want to have happen. When the bunny gets close to an ogre, we wanted the score to go up. Maybe the bunny should say hug, and then we should make the ogre disappear. And we should actually move the ogre away from the bunny, but I'll talk about that when we get to it. We want to move the ogre away so that we don't fire the event a second time. So let's add 1 to the score. We know how to do that. We're going to go to the scene, and we're going to increase the score. So that'll happen when we get close to the ogre. In fact, let's just run this and see what happens right now. We move forward. You can see we got close to that ogre and the score went up by 1. And let's try it on another ogre. We get close to this ogre, the score went up again. Now you see, one of the problems is that as we move past the ogre and then move back or just move near or around that ogre, sometimes it's firing the event multiple times. Like we can see the score going up more than once. And if we want the bunny to hug the ogre and then have the ogre disappear, we probably don't want the score to go up multiple times. So let's fix that. A few things we should do. So we wanted the bunny to say hug when it gets close to an ogre. Let's drag that out. And let's make the ogre appear to go away. We're going to switch to Now here in the list, because we've set up this whole if statement and loop, we have this tile called target. There's another item in the list of things we can choose from. It doesn't know what type of object it is. It just knows that it's a biped, and it's called target. So we're going to switch to the target, right, in this list of options here. And what do we want the target to do? Well, we want the target to become invisible. So we're going to set the opacity to be equal to 0. So making the opacity be invisible. Opacity of 1 is solid. Opacity of 0 is invisible. And now what we need to do is actually just get that ogre out of there. So we don't want that ogre to trigger any more collisions. And so a little trick that you can do, and this is going to be key if you're doing any kind of game where somebody gets something else and you don't want that to happen again. So you need the target to move or to get away. What we're going to do is tell the target to move forward by how much? Say by 100. So we're going to move it 100 meters away from the bunny, which, as you know, would be way outside of this room. And we're going to make the duration of that move be really fast, 0.01. So now let's try this out. Move the bunny forward, getting a little bit closer, getting really close. And you know what? Looks like the bunny had to get too close to the ogre to make that happen. But it's not a big deal. So let's just run this again. Yeah. So it says hug, the score goes up by 1. Hug, the score goes up by 2. Score goes up by 3. You can see there that the basic idea of having a heads-up display and have it react to multiple items in a list, which is a key element of a game, is working. And so hopefully that is something that helps you if you choose to make some kind of first-person style game for your project this month in class.